too, and then I'll introduce. Hey everyone, I am happy to present the next speaker, Christopher Lafayette. Chris Lafayette is an all around XR expert. He's a speaker, practitioner, anything virtual is Chris. And I won't go through and read your bio, Chris, but what you can do for me is tell everyone what it is you do, because you do so much. I don't know exactly what it is you do from day to day. So can you tell everybody what it is you do?
Hi, Bitcoin. How's it going? First and foremost, I'd be remiss in not certainly a tip of the hat to the hard work that Bitcoin is doing in its leadership with Dennis Schultz. And Dennis, it's always a pleasure to be with you again and with this organization and all the wonderful and terrific work that you do for our Black underserved communities with Greg Greenlee and so many other leaders that have been just driving Bitcoin for years now and wading it through these new times that we find ourselves in. My name is Christopher Lafayette, international national speaker and emergent technologist. I study on emerging technologies from artificial intelligence to extended reality, from the metaversal spaces and platforms, which we'll probably touch on to some degree, from robotics to IoT, digital twins, hyperrealism, telepresence, and so many different other technologies I've had the pleasure of speaking on, including that of medical technology.
So what is your current passion right now? I mean, because that's a lot. Is the medical tech the big thing that you're focused on these days?
I would say that at the top of the spear right now, my biggest passion right now is community development and centralization into hyperrealistic immersive simulated environments and creating constructs for academics, education. And within that wheelhouse of an ecosystem comes the medical sphere, which comes to surgical training and simulation training, decompression therapy treatment, dealing with training specifically with looking at XR from an empathy engine, where we're able to understand what it's like to be a dementia patient. On the other side of that is saying, how can we triage burn victims? How can we deal with mental health and wellness with dealing with extended reality, meaning virtual and augmented reality for those who may be with us that may not be so familiar with that specific technology.
Yeah, and I think, from just from the outside looking in, from all of the, virtual reality, augmented reality, AI, machine learning, this is something that a lot of people hear about in buzzwords, but don't necessarily know too much about in practicality.
Yeah. I mean, Dennis, I'll still, you approach someone and say, hey, do you know what virtuality is? And someone will say, isn't that a 90s video game? Right. And so what ends up happening is that, and one of the things that I admonish my peers in this industry is that we have to do a better job of becoming educators of this technology. Let's kind of go back for a second. Over the last 30 years, technology has never grown as exponentially as it has. And in the last 10 years, the greatest technology that's been presented to us, contemporary to our time, here in our time, is communication. So when anyone asks, what's the greatest single development within the eco-habitat of technology and emerging technologies, it's undoubtedly communication. And in other words, Zoom and Hopin, these platforms were here before the pandemic and before we ever went into quarantine. What happens is that oftentimes we'll see the incrementation, shifts, and leaps. Look, technology moves in 3 phases. For all that's listening, take your notes, please. Technology moves in 3s: increments, shifts, and leaps. Incrementation, your updated iPhone, your updated iPad, your updated Chromebook. A lot of people say, man, Apple hasn't coming out with anything good in so long. Go trade your iPhone 12 for a 4. The hardware interface may not be dramatically different, but the software interface is wildly different with everything that's involved, with neural networks and all the different things that are embedded within the actual hardware ecosystem. That's incrementation. The next would be a shift. A shift would be new hardware, a new virtual reality headset, a new tablet, a new device that's come to scene, a new form of robotics. But then a leap A leap is far cry different because a leap is very rare. The leap would be likened unto the internet, cloud, the metaverse. These have global impact in how we operate, function, move, conduct, communicate within everything that we do in our daily lives on the business, consumer side, and enterprise constructs. So where we find ourselves now today is something dramatic has happened. And we talked about this in BitCon New York last year, which was fascinating at a major time in the beginning or near the beginning stages of the pandemic. And what's happened is usually when we see in technology that technology disrupts technology, technology disrupts other technologies, and new prevailing and emerging technologies prevail from those ashes, or oftentimes what we may call the trough of disillusionment, Gartner's hype cycle. But now what's happened is never have we seen before in our time, even our predecessors' time, have we seen a pandemic globally disrupt technology. So now what's happened, supply chains have been frazzled. The need and demand for greater communication and lenses is at an all-time high, even to the essentials of glass and iron for microphone and visualization. Now we're talking about ingress and egress of whole entire economies horizontally, not just the tech sector, but whole industries have transitioned into what we now call the remote and hybrid world of working. And we're never going back. So the great leaps and bounds of where we've gone are not only historic, but they're transformative. But there's a problem. We have to go back because we left whole entire communities behind. Our Black and brown communities, our underserved communities. Because the further that we move into extending reality, we cannot extend reality unless we bring reality with it. And if we do not, on the foundational construct of where we are today, bring underserved communities into the collaborative development and build and product delivery teams and everything that we're building within our ecosystems and how relatable they are, if we do not do that, we're building on an inappropriate foundation that is susceptible to fail at any given time. So our biggest threat isn't necessarily strategically and openly from a cybersecurity threat. The biggest threat that we face right now is a lack of inclusion when it comes to our ecosystems. Ecosystems are not a set of hardware and software. Ecosystems are people. And when we begin to look at the technology that's being developed today, and people will say, well, I hear that, but Apple's a $2 trillion valued company. They're doing just fine. I would submit to you that Apple would be valued as a $10 trillion company if they had greater inclusion within their own ranks. And I enjoy Apple on many levels, Microsoft, Google, and several other platforms. But the reality is that it's not just a feel-good initiative for us to be able to graft in superior intelligence when it comes to Black contributing communities. And it's certainly not just what we call web diversity 2.0. Oh, look at it as a revenue driver. That's fine. Look at us as a functioning cog in your ecosystem that you essentially need in moving from a monocultural development to polycultural development. And when we're able to do that, then we'll truly be creating extended reality.
So, Chris, let me just have you define XR, because I think, and you are right on as far as like leaving communities behind, and the fact that, you kind of have to move reality based on where people are in their own personal reality at that given time. But how do you define it for the broader context? What is XR in your words?
XR, which is an acronym that was recently adopted within the last 24 to 36 months, frankly, and it's been accepted colloquial within the industry of XR and to enterprise, is extended reality. And extended reality is a terminology that comes from augmented and virtual reality. And augmented and virtual reality is a process or an intention noted and documented that goes all the way back to Formalgili's spectacles, which now we're going all the way back even before the 1950s into the late 1800s. and that there have been technologists, and I won't say through the annals of time, let's just stay within the last 2 centuries. There have been technologists that have been documenting and expanding and exploring the possibilities of what it would look like to be able to create virtual interfaces that we interact with some we may call it visiohaptics for AR, augmented reality. Well, what it would be for us to interact with virtual, intangible mainframes, and not just to interact, but to actually get inside, to ingress, and to operate within. And what if we can be able to visit our loved ones, create fiction, nonfiction, and to be able to operate through interoperability and create persistent environments where we're able to buy, sell, trade, and build. So what's happened through time is that when we got, say, to the 80s, which I call it the prototypical generation, NASA Ames and NASA and other different organizations, and for some reason, they think that all the people that have created at the inception of extended reality don't look like us. A lot of them look like us. You just never hear their stories. But creating in the 80s, prototypical generation of technology where the headsets were this big, and you put them on your head and you see a box, you see a ping pong and all this. Then it went into the 90s where it said, okay, we're ready to go to market, which we weren't ready to go to market. It was experimental age. Then we go into the 2000s where we start to understand the graphic level and the computational visualization for human capacity to understand and perceive through human factor ergonomic development. Now we're finding ourselves where we're actually exploring on what we call cognition. Now we're exploring on what we call environmental fidelity and contextual fidelity. And here comes the iPhone. Here comes the Android. Here comes BlackBerry. Here comes Palm Pilot. Here comes the iPad. Here comes these smart tablets. But here's the deal, Dennis. The idea was never for us to go and only look at our devices. That's never been the full intention. The idea was for us to one day get inside of our devices. And what's happened by way of this pandemic, it has accelerated by 7 to 10 years the world acceptability of virtual. Look, we're no longer subjected, even in the throes of business, to commercial realty. It is now acceptable, and in many ways, for multi-billion-dollar platforms to conduct business virtually, because we've all been inducted into a case study and everyone had to participate.
That's a good analogy.
And so now that we've participated in this case study, businesses, look, Pinterest said, here's $90 million we want out of our lease. People are realizing, hey, we can actually not only do business by, in a lot of ways, giving people their commute back, but not only do business, but through telepresence and communication. And by the power of the cloud, transfer files, get what people need to do their work more efficiently. And they're saying in some ways, productivity has gone up 10, 20, 50x in productivity with room to spare. And our hireability, you no longer have to, where I am in Silicon Valley, have to purchase a 700 square foot asset or real estate for over $1 million. And so what happens is we're no longer subjected to location bias. That means I can live in Charlotte and work at Google right here in Sunnyvale. I can live right here in Palo Alto and I can work in Charlotte. I can build and chop wood anywhere globally so long as the communication apparatus is there.
So, okay, I'm with you. I mean, you're dropping a lot of knowledge, and I get it. And we've had conversations about this before, so we've had these conversations. But for the sake of the audience, when it comes to, why things aren't where they should be, like why can't I, do my, Obi-Wan Kenobi hologram, conversation? Why is, virtual reality headsets, still bulky and expensive? Why haven't things got to the point where, VR is ubiquitous? what's the holdup?
Sure. I think that's a very appropriate and spot on question. The holdup is that we have to manage expectations. And unfortunately, what happens is there's a tremendous amount of deal flow in market for those that have been funded and ready to come to market that have hyped up this technology. Now you take Magic Leap that just got another $500 million on top of their $6 billion plus capital that they've raised, which is the biggest funded startup in the history of time. And they failed tremendously on their first leg. The biggest funded capital startup and the biggest problem that Magic Leap had was a failure of culture. To answer your question, which I think is one of the most appropriate questions I've heard all year in business asked me, Dennis, it's a failure of culture. It's a failure of accessibility. It's a failure of not understanding your audience. It's a failure of not grafting in all different types of talent. It's a failure of not speaking to the adage that we need to hire the people that we want to buy our products. It's a failure of globally recognizing and understanding that there's a global audience and that your limited small product delivery teams and who you have developing and making these products have only made it for a few and not the many. We've only had 52 to 59 million virtual reality headsets that's been deployed. There's a major, major problem with development. We have a microchip shortage that's happening in Taiwan. We have a microchip shortage that's affecting the globe. We have a microchip shortage that's affecting cars and automation and all the intentions of what we want to build. We've been disrupted already with supply chain. Respectfully and on a very kind note, when we start to think about the pandemic, here alone in the United States, it's 700,000 people that have taken off the flesh, that are gone. Who replaces some of these jobs that come to be and that are lost and gone forever with that talent? There's a lot that happens even when one person leaves. And so there's a lot of disarray that's happened for us to be able to even get this product out there. And like I've said, we haven't done a good job in educating. So the biggest obstacle that the extended reality community faces is the extended reality community itself, and not keeping it straight with the people, letting them know where we're at and the realistic timelines. I do not believe that will be widespread consumption for VR realistically for another 10 years. When it comes to AR adoption, that within the next 24 months, it's going to explode. Glasses, AR glasses, we already have 2 billion deployed devices that have AR, augmented reality capability. But again, it never was something just to be able to hold in my hand and to be able to look at that. Quite frankly, that's boring. But when I can do hands-free interaction, that's going to be wonderful. But there needs to be a sense of trust for those that are actually deploying glasses that we're going to have on our face. And Facebook is not the way.
Yeah, so it reminds me. I know when the Google Glass came out, and I saw a couple people with those, and I mean it's cool for the handful of people who had them. I thought it was a little geeky, a little nerdy, and I think that was the point. For a lot of folks, they wanted to be super geeked out with those glasses. But what I see from an AR perspective, or at least more practically, is things like heads-up displays. So, in my car, I get the directions right on the screen on, where to turn, and it's integrated with my maps. So I can navigate basically hands-free, with audio alerts, and also the heads-up display. That to me is a great user experience. Where do you see that AR future going?
Dennis, I'll roll with you. We've had great conversations on this in times past, and you and I and others have been afforded to have these discussions. Let me piggyback on what you just said. I'll just start with where you're at with in regards to heads-up display and how imaginative that can be. Let's kick it up just a little notch higher and say, okay, if I'm a trucker is the biggest employable job in this country when it comes to driving and trucking. Let's say about that. So you're in the Midwest or you're up north and you're driving through the Sawtooth Mountains. You're pulling triples, and that's a pretty heavy load. There's a blizzard going on. You can't see the road. Now, commonly, truckers have learned to ride trucking by braille, and they can feel the road by the wheels. Well, let's take augmented reality, not just automation, but AR. What if you can simulate the actual road itself to where you're driving by computer-guided visualization? That
kind
means
of like autopilot, or not quite?
No, that means you and I were sitting here driving this truck. thunderstorm, snowstorm, but there's AR markers all
Okay.
along and across
Gotcha.
the whole entire interstate. It's all embedded with AR markers, cloud AR, real-time augmented projection, which is a technology I've been working on for years, RTAP. And all of a sudden, if it's snowing, raining, no problem, because I have a complete hyper realistic human eye resolution synthetic version of a road that I'm driving on to where it's indiscernible to the human eye of what it is that I'm going to be driving. So the feats of AR for me, and I love the example that you pulled from, the feats of AR is about safety and medical technology for me. I think the best and the biggest investments for AR right now in the face of this pandemic that we've had is how do we guide crews and do more training better? That's what we're working on right now in respect to one of our platforms called AugLab. And right now we're working on AR interfaces and updating so people that are working in laboratory production can come in there and train. We need our biochemists. We need our molecular biologists in us. We need them to come in and find out Pfizer and understand boosters and understand Moderna and all these vaccinations we've had and get ready for the next pandemic that may come in tow or the next variant. We need to accelerate our student capacity and our even the professional capacity. How do we not only allow them or give them capability and tool and utility to accelerate their training to understand to work their way around a lab, but Dennis, how do I can get a lab that's in Wuhan, China, and connect them with a lab in Atlanta? How do I connect those two together for telepresence? They can work side by side. That's part of the brilliance, part of the great brilliance of AR. And Microsoft Mesh is a very compelling tool for that. Microsoft's doing a terrific job, I think, in helping lead that way with their HoloLens.
Yeah. Microsoft is a partner. Shout out to Microsoft. So we mentioned use cases in transportation and biotech, medical as well. I'm sure that telepresence feature. Obviously, there's telepresence for doctors currently to examine patients and those types of things. Are there other things or other use cases that you see on the horizon that may just not have hit mainstream yet but are coming?
Sure. I would start to look at gestural interface with point cloud precision technology. So it's one thing when we talk about augmented and virtual reality, singular and alone. But remember, within the eco habitat, there's all of these technologies that abide, and all these technologies are beginning to scale. Artificial intelligence, and they're flanked by, let's say, chatbots and smart bots and neural networks and so forth and so on, and deep learning and machine learning. And then you have itself with AR, VR flanked by its different members. What happens is that these technologies begin to cross-pollinate and be able to blend in with one another. So now I'm using my AR, but now it's AR guided assistant with a smart assistant that's involved with that. This is what is actually bringing us to what we call, what you may have heard of called the metaverse. The metaverse, meaning metaversal platforms of virtual world constructs, galaxies and universes, are going to be ways for us to get out of Hopin and get out of Zoom and all these other platforms that we enjoy so much. And I can imagine within the next 24 to 36 months, Dennis, that not only will you hold audience personally and in person, which is somewhat the hope I know of that, to be able to have in person, but at the same time, virtual members who may not be readily be able to fly. And where we're having this conversation in human eye resolution conversation, completely virtually immersive on your planet, on the Blacks in Technology planet. And on this planet, you'll be able to do transactions, you'll be able to host events, lightning rounds, pitch sessions, presentations, and so forth and so on, because I got access in my past to be able to virtually translate and to teleport either by way of this or my iMac into your virtual planet.
That's making my brain hurt. So I'm thinking like, if I am, it sounds like what you're describing is like the real life Sims. Like I could create my own potential Blacks in Technology universe and have folks interact in real time visualization, not avatars, but the real deal. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. We're building it right now with the Hip Hop Coins platform. It's called the Cypherverse, which will be the biggest hip hop constructed metaversal platform in the world. It's happening now. It's laid out. We're working and talking with people from Samsung and other different organizations. and Microsoft about what we can do to be able to create constructs of virtual worlds and planets. And here's the fun thing about the metaverse, Dennis. The metaverse is about two things. One, it's about community, which is the biggest part. You can't have a metaverse without meta people. The other thing, it's about ownership. When I go on Facebook, I don't own any of it. When I go on Twitter, I own nothing. Spend my time on LinkedIn, and these are great tools, but we own nothing. In the metaverse, I can own a planet. I can own a city within your virtual world of Blacks in Tech. So when I go to Bitcoin City, I may own a building by way of an NFT transaction. That means I can do an NFT, secure that deal and that wager on a ledger of the blockchain, and I can solidify that. And now this little city of mine that's sitting here in my wallet, I own it on Bitcoin Planet, and I bought it with fiat currency, or I bought it with Bitcoin, Ethereum, or other types of different virtual crypto assets that exist, in new ones that are coming to light.
Okay, I'm getting there with you. So I have this universe. So who creates the universe and who owns the real estate, and how do I, create my metaversal city in this scenario?
Sure. So right now we have a lot of different metaversal platforms and virtual worlds that exist now. Let's look at Fortnite. That's a virtual world. Let's look at Roblox. That's a virtual world. Let's look at Altspace. Let's look at several others. And what happened in Facebook's Horizon, which we're not going to go there. But what happens is that we already see that happening in avatar construct development and ownership of that. But we go into these environments, and now there's all this digital real estate that could be developed. A lot of the real estate that you see developed in virtual worlds right now is user-submitted development, because they're given user-created tools to be able to create their constructs. But now what we're going to see is a renaissance period of virtual worlds, creating virtual worlds and giving you an SDK construct, so long as you're a designer or developer, or even the layman, laywoman. She or he will be able to take advantage of these tools and be able to create the kind of world that really speaks to them from the cultural perspective and lens perspective, and giving you all the opportunity to be able to buy it. Most of those transactions will happen in marketplace by way of fiat money, but expect to see a lot of different NFT gain for buy, sell, trade, and barter. And so I would be able to go again, if I'm going into the Blacks in Technology planet, and let's say that it's the size of our Earth plane, and let's say we're using the Earth plane grid system or not. It has its own grid system. I could be able to say, Blacks in Technology, they have 100 spaces for sale, and each space is 2 acres. All we have is 100. And you create 100 non-fungible tokens for an audience that may not know what that is. A non-fungible token, meaning that it's something that just cannot be replaced. Once it's made, it's one of a kind. It could be duplicated, but it's the one exact original. And I take that non-fungible token. That means if I have a basketball, that's not necessarily an NFT. A basketball is a basketball. If I have a basketball that's signed by Air, now that basketball is worth a whole lot more, because Air Jordan went and signed that basketball. That's an original NFT that I have. And that means you want to purchase it and I want to sell it, and let's make a deal. That's the same thing that we're talking about with Bit, and we're talking about the 100 planets or properties that are 2 acres per. I can go in there and purchase that, and now I own that, Dennis. And now I can invite you to come and sit with me in my virtual space, and us to be able to partake on a number of given subjects. Think about that, the magnitude of that. For the first time, we're going to see the renaissance of ownership. The only other time we've ever seen that, naturally, which is one of the biggest consumed assets in technology, is a domain. Is a domain.
So just because I'm now thinking about how I'm going to create my universe or my world, and how I'm going to charge for my real estate. But I'm thinking that it will be similar to creating a mod for a video game, like a Counter-Strike or Unreal Tournament, where you kind of create your own world and set your own rules. Is that kind of how that works? Or, you mentioned Roblox or, Minecraft or whatever. Same principle?
The ideas stem from that, Dennis. That's one of the best perfect examples that I've ever heard. Absolutely. You as a technologist look at it from a mod perspective, and absolutely there's ownership and full autonomy with that. You can create whatever you want so long as the SDK permits, and the really good virtual worlds will allow you to bring from one planet or one world into theirs because it's open source, it's free, and there's no barrier to entry. So long as it's a valid and safe asset that's entering into this actual virtual space. So absolutely, even for gamified situations or gaming constructs, you can pull in your favorite character from Skyrim. You can pull in your favorite character from Madden and say, hey, I want this person to be able to operate. So long as you have license and autonomy to be able to do it. Your yellow dog that's in one virtual world is a yellow dog that's in your virtual world. But here's the difference. You own it. You own this virtual world. We see assets that are already selling in Decentraland for over $900,000. People are buying these assets. So it's not something that we're conceiving, hoping. These financial transactions are on record. They're happening now where people are buying virtual real estate. I believe what stands to benefit the Black community in particular is that we're at such an even level field right now, where right now is the time to be able to invest. Jay-Z, Rock Nation, they just bought a massive galactic virtual world called Sensorium. That was a purchase that happened this summer. That was a very quiet move. Everyone that's looking with us right now, look that up. Sensorium Galaxy. Why does Rock Nation? Rock Nation produces dope music, deals with athletes and culture. Why would they want to buy a virtual galaxy? Because they know how virtual we've become, and they realize that people want to be able to ingress and go and listen to their favorite musician. From my head.
So I can go to Kanye Planet if I wanted to, and hang out with all the people who love Yeezy, and that would be
Dennis, imagine this for a moment. Let's go back to hip hop. That's one of the reasons we built hip hop coins and create NFTs. Let's go back to hip hop. Let's talk about Wu-Tang Clan. You're East, you know what I'm. Let's talk about 36 Chambers. Let's talk about Wu-Tang Clan. Let's talk about Nas. Let's talk about Pac. Let's talk about Onyx. Let's talk about CNN. These hip hop groups that created such visualizations in their wording and their lyrics. What if hip hop, its preservation and its growth and the pairing, a ride to technology where we don't just listen to our music anymore? And beyond the video, we see and interact with our music. These words that these poets, these young boys and men and women have formed. Think about where we are. What is the biggest revenue generator for the Black community in terms of business? The biggest revenue generator that's happened for the Black community in terms of business is twofold. It's sports and hip hop. There is no other way that those are the biggest capital generating, and that's only within the last 3 to 4 decades. The biggest financial gain for Black communities has been sports and music. We must preserve our music. And how do we do that? Through virtual technology. So to your point, Dennis, I concur. A Yeezy world, that will happen, undoubtedly.
Okay, I'm still, again, mine's still blown a little bit. I'm trying to piece it back together. So there's this universe, Rock Nation has their universe of whatever, or their galaxy.
Sorry.
Yes. So in theory, I may be thinking too small. I was thinking a planet. Maybe I should have a Black tech galaxy.
The one that we're building right now called the Cypher First is a galaxy. Our first one is Galaxy 1. We have 2,000 planets. We'll be selling 2,000 planets. It's a quad, and there's 500 planets per quad, northeast, west, and south. Right now, we're creating 2,000 individually different design planets and constructs so that you'll be able to register in a registry and you'll be able to buy a land, and it'll be finite in availability. Once it's purchased and it's owned, you'd have to go to that owner to be able to buy it. Once our SDK comes out, you'll be able to open that up. with the SDK, and you'll be able to build right from your SDK, which will be guided by Unity and Unreal Engine. You'll be able to go in there and make the planet that you want with full autonomy. It's not even necessarily a white label, Dennis, where it's like, here's our software, but white label it. It's not even that, brother. What it is, it's its owner. You own it.
So how far out are we talking? Obviously, things are moving fast right now. What are you thinking for Ubiquity? Another year or two out, or sooner, longer?
We're here now with Roblox, Fortnite, and others, and Horizon, Altspace, Rebella, and other platforms. We're here now. Ubiquity, which is a great question, 24 months. 24 months, you'll start to be able to see the potential acquisition. Some will take longer than others. I mean, look at what we see happening over here around the corner in respects to NVIDIA and the Omniverse. These verses are out here. Mark Zuckerberg just came out and made a wild statement about what they're looking to be able to do with their own virtual platform, Horizon, looking at it as a metaversal construct in the platform. Right now, and you look at the great things that Microsoft is doing with the acquisition of Altspace years ago from Gavin Wilhite and others. Right now, we're going to see an expansion in virtual worlds, because it can't just be about the one-to-one video sessions that we do, because there is such a thing medically that we're starting to look at and wrap our minds around, called Zoom fatigue, where it's just one-to-one dimensional transaction. Now we need to be able to have environments where we're able to operate and move around and look, and to be able to communicate, and to be able to kind of stretch our legs and arms, to be able to have more open, wide conversation. It's just how we naturally cohabitate and how our brains operate.
And how are we evaluating this universe? Who's setting the prices? Is it just like crypto, where it is what we say it is as far as the prices? I mean, talk to me about the money behind it, or the finance methodology.
So naturally, we'll treat it like a startup. Most entry is, what adopters do you have that are coming in there? That's one value add. The other value add is what is happening in respect to your marketplace, not just your NFT transactions, but your actual marketplace where people are actually buying assets in the platform. It's really the same principles that we use for our apps and in-app purchasing that we would use for these virtual contracts. The difference is that we look at apps this way. We're going to step inside our apps, and they're going to be virtual worlds instead of a virtual app. They'll just be virtual worlds. So the same valuation process is actually going to be the same. Now, you bring up a great point when it comes to crypto assets, cryptocurrency, and what role and environment do they have, because we're looking at, in a lot of ways, decentralized finance, which is a huge, huge subject. So we're not necessarily going to be beholden to centralized finance. One is saying, hey, it's going to be decentralized finance all the way. It's the only way to go. I disagree with that. I believe centralized and decentralized both will play a role and interact with it. But that's where the good question comes up, Dennis. A lot of this is unknown, undiscovered territory, and we're willing to see what comes out and see how markets react to the new contributors that come out there. Some will wildly fail. Remember, we have peak of inflated interest. That's where we're at right now with virtual worlds. There's peak of inflated interest. Then it goes down to the trough of disillusionment, because it's failed. It was a disillusionment. From that failed data, we go into the slope of enlightenment. And then we go on to the plateau of creativity, where we began to create based on the fail data that's been contributed. So fail, I believe Wayne Sutton was even talking about fail is a value add to the constructs of technology. We wouldn't even be able to talk and have our conversations, Dennis, over the years virtually, if it weren't for good fail data. And we look at Blacks in Technology, which is the biggest driver for Black communities and technology on the planet. It wouldn't have a reason to assemble, if it weren't for the fail data that's come through the decades, and that our predecessors have contributed to. And that's why I think it's so vitally important, with all that's happened, with the responsibility that we're imbued with, to make sure that we now picked up the baton of not only building the technology where they left off at, but making sure that everyone has an opportunity to build it.
Wow. Yeah. Every time I talk to you, my brain gets a little more, frazzled, because the potentials are there. I'm always looking at that hype cycle, figuring out where things are, when to get in, if it's really going to be a thing or not, and when it's too late. So, so it sounds like there's definitely opportunity and potential to, you know, to kind of carve your path or figure out how you're gonna, make your way in this new metaverse world or universe rather. And any suggestions that you would have for someone like myself who may be considering dabbling into, wading into the water, so to speak, for a metaverse space?
I think what happens is, Dennis, is that, and I know you to be a very industrious person. You're an explorer, you're a pioneer. You epitomize it. And what happens is that I think for us right now, we wait to see what comes on the horizon. What might be a good investment for us to be able to ingress into? Because when you travel with many. And so what happens is that once you get that buy-in, you begin to move in that direction. You want to make sure that there's not going to be any full regret for getting into an environment that can't carry itself. So my thing is, let's see what happens in the next 12 months of business, what comes on the horizon, and we all stay in good touch and communication as we do, and sharing the community. And our community together will be able to help inform one another. What are some of the things that we see that are promising, that are actual, where people aren't wasting their time, because time, every moment is precious. And we just don't get these times back, Dennis. And the things and the decisions, obviously, that we do in business, we certainly want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of the time that we get. And so a lot of it is, let's wait to see together what may come down the horizon, and could be of a benefit to what we all do in business.
Yeah, no, very well put. And with that, we are at time. I'm sure we could continue talking for another hour. But Chris, this was very enlightening to say the least. Hopefully, you guys got a lot out of it. I know I did. I felt like this was a personal conversation. I forgot that other people were actually participating. But if there are any additional questions, hit me up. I can get the information to Chris, and we can continue on the conversation about XR and the metaverse. Wow, that's wow. So thanks again, Chris. Next up on the main stage, we are going to be discussing there we go, redefining gender roles in tech. Oh, that conversation is going to be a good one, coming up in 5 minutes on the main stage. And then on the in the session, we have disruption is the new normal, which is also going to be a very good. So the good thing is that you don't have to pick between one or the other. You can always get the replay of the one that you missed if you're attending one and not the other. We look forward to seeing you in the next few minutes. Short break, and I'll be back soon.